All right, so on Tech Project 7, I reduced the number of images that you have to work on from a lot down to just 4. So there's image A, B like boy, D like dog, and F like Frank. So those are the ones that you need to work on if you downloaded them already. If not, I did update the download link so that it just gets you the ones that you need. This first image is all about removing the power lines. You're not color correcting, you're not changing the sky or doing any creative edits. Your goal is simply to remove the power lines. So that's it. If I toggle this layer on and off, I've done it already several times, but here's a version with and without. So you see kind of what we're going for. And then I'll show you how to get to that point. Now, a lot of these tools throughout this assignment that you're going to use are local pixel editing tools, meaning they're modifying individual pixels throughout your image. This is a destructive process, and there's not really a way around that. And so there's a couple different ways you can do it. One is to make a new blank layer. So if we make a new blank layer, let's go Control-Shift-N. We'll call this our work or retouch or whatever you want to name that layer. We'll just make a blank layer. And then many of our retouching tools like the spot healing brush, the clone stamp, they're going to have options to let you work on a blank layer but sample from a different layer. So for example, in the options bar up here for the healing brush tool, we have sample current and below. Default is going to say current layer. So make sure you're on current and below. The clone stamp tool, it's going to work kind of the same way. So if we grab the clone stamp tool over here, it says current and below. If this just says current layer, we can alt click to sample, and then when we paint, it doesn't do anything because it's sampling transparent pixels of my blank work layer. Current and below, on the other hand, lets me sample the sky up here, and it's going to paint onto that layer. Now, just so you see what that's doing here, we've got my blank layer, and I've sampled into that part of the image, but I've painted on my blank work layer. Okay, so let's undo that. All right, now, your best tools for working on this are going to be twofold. There's the clone stamp tool, which you'll use on a regular basis here, not because it's great at patching things in seamlessly, but because it intentionally is going to be used to what I call, I don't know if there's a way to, there's a proper Photoshop term for this, but to create little channels and gaps to bridge your other tools, areas that are going to be difficult without causing artifacts. Let me show you what I mean. If I zoom in up here, you can see close-up detail. It's sky all around on both sides. If we grab one of these tools that work great for a lot of things, like the spot healing brush, for example, and we just paint over this and let go. Let me draw some guides so we see what happened. Let me undo that one more time. So we'll put a guide out right here and another guide right over here. I'm going to drag from the center of that one guide right here over to the center of the other guide. And that black overlay is just to show me where I'm painting. Now when I let go, this brush, what it's going to do is it's going to sample the areas around the brush. Now make note of what is the area around the brush. On the top and bottom it's sky, but on the left and right it's more of that power line. So when I let go, it samples in from the edges, which is power line over there and power line over here, and it's going to leave these weird artifacts. We don't want that. Now if instead I break this up into 2 steps, I switch over to the clone stamp tool and I sample up here and paint in just like that. Sample up here, paint in just like that. Now when I go back to the spot healing brush tool, if I paint in, it's seamless because let me undo. This time if I paint from here to here, whatever is on the edges is blue sky no matter what. Front, back of the brush, top and bottom of the brush, it's going to only sample sky in there. So that's a concept that you're going to use throughout this project, especially when you get to image F, the guy with the tattoos. You're going to need to remove tattoos off of a face, and it's going to be very difficult to do unless you keep in mind that you can break it apart like that. All right. Now, I'm not going to go through and retouch this whole image, but I'm just going to do a couple of spot areas. The sky is pretty simple. But when you get in here into the structure, this is a transitional area where if you're using certain tools, then it might cause problems unless you break things apart. So I'm going to switch to this clone stamp tool and just paint across like this. And it doesn't work very well, right? Doesn't align. So let's undo. Instead, if I use my sample target and put it right here over the brick, then bring it down here, I can line it up perfectly with the area that the pattern matches. We have the grout lines in that brick. We can just click and paint a little bit on both sides, and it's going to match up really nicely. That same concept of sampling and just being aware of what it is you're sampling, that's going to work great with things like the healing brush tool. In fact, the healing brush tool I like a lot better than even the spot healing brush. I think it just is much more effective. So we'll just sample on an area where there's a repeatable pattern that we want to match, like right there. I'll bring that down to line that up. Make sure everything is as best lined up as I can get it. And then I just need to paint enough in there that it's not going to cause problems. And notice that it does, because my sample area was too close to the original pixels. And the tool is going to keep sampling that power line, even though you see how I've already kind of cloned it out where my target is, that little crosshair. Just be aware of how this works. The clone stamp tool is a really kind of simple, basic tool in Photoshop that's been around forever. But it's going to be very, very useful to you in patching in certain areas and making sure that there aren't problem areas. Now, when you get into spots like down here, this might be an area where we can switch over to the clone stamp tool, let's say, and let's just cut a little channel again. I'll click down here, bring this up, make it match. We could probably get away with using the clone stamp tool a lot more than what I'm going to do right now, but that's all right. Just want to patch that in right here. Okay, then I'll switch over to like the spot healing brush. I'm using keyboard shortcuts, J for that, spot healing brush. I'll come in here, draw a line across. And because the pattern is really continuous on this corrugated metal and the window frames and everything, it's going to look really, really good. It's going to do a great job of making that match up. If we get into areas like right here, see the corner is yellow of some of that, and then we go into the maroon on the other side. I'm just going to start out here and go across. It gets a little confused right there on that corner because we've got dark maroon, light maroon, and yellow all in one area, and the tool doesn't really know exactly how to make that work. And so that may be a case where we need to search and find some pixels that we can copy into that. I'm not too concerned about every little single detail of this being absolutely perfect on this image, but you want things to be good as best you can. So what that means in this case is I would probably switch over to my clone stamp tool. I do have some good pixels right here that I could sample over, so I'll just grab that. It helps sometimes make your brush really big, bigger than what you're actually going to paint, just so that it's easy to line it up with where it should be. If you're using a trackpad, it's hard because your finger is going to move around on that trackpad. With a mouse, you just take your hand off it and it stays perfectly still while you resize that brush. Then you come in and click and just paint in the little bit of detail that you need to get that to look the way it should. Okay, but look for details that you can clean up, like some of these lines got a little wobbly, and we can just paint those back in pretty easily with the clone stamp tool. All right, and like I said, I'm not going to go through and do this whole thing, but that level of detail, nobody's going to tell any problem with it from looking at it at this distance. So you're going to go through and work on cleaning up all those power lines across the front of this building. You don't have to edit color or anything else, like I said before. Just get it here. Now, one thing I'll point out, and people that watch this video, you're getting a little bonus here, I guess. But if I were to zoom in over there, notice that I haven't removed all the power lines over in this area. I know you guys have a lot of work to do. If you leave these two vertical poles here, those are actually part of the power lines. If I go back out, you see it's the light rail through downtown Phoenix. That's part of that line. You know, if you don't get that out of there, it won't be the end of the world. But do get all this stuff over here on the side of the frame. Get everything that goes across. Obviously, you get all the sky and stuff. Power lines are your enemy here. Get rid of all the power lines that you can. I recommend, if you find the time, get through this is definitely doable, but like I said before, you guys have a lot to do. And if you don't get this bit of power line that's right kind of in this area here, it's okay. All right, let's move on to our next image. That's going to be this one actually, right here. Now this image, I'm going to probably show even less of retouching on this one, but I'll just go over kind of some workflow tips I think that will help. The final result will look different for everybody. Everybody's got their own tastes. Everybody's got their own idea of what ideal should look like. But to put it into words, what you're going for here is what's called a beauty retouch. This is shot with harsh light, cross light, which this particular person, when I shot this photo, she has great skin. She, she's a model. She's paid to pose for pictures and stuff. And so the fact that the light's coming across really accentuates pores and any kind of imperfections or anything. Everybody has them. Celebrities, everyone. If it looks like they don't, then you know it's photoshopped, because everybody's faces have something on them, just natural skin. And so the amount of retouching that you do, whether you want them to look like plastic fake or just a little bit more natural, my philosophy is that if it's something that's not going to be on their face in 2 weeks, then it shouldn't be there in the photo. So temporary blemishes and things like that, definitely, I would just clean those up without a single problem on my conscience for that. Permanent features of somebody's face, those typically I wouldn't do if it's a regular type of portrait or headshot or something. If it's advertising, for example, then if it's something that distracts the audience, the viewer, from the product that's being sold, and then that's the kind of thing that you would remove too. What it comes down to in the end is how much does a client want you to retouch? How much do they want you to remove or to modify or change? And so as a retoucher, that's a line that you need to think about too. Like, how far do you want to go? What are you comfortable with doing? And what are you not comfortable with doing? In the US, it's pretty much everything goes to the extent of whatever that brand or that publication is willing to do. Certain brands like Target, for example, have really pulled back from heavily retouched images in the US. In other countries like France, for example, legally you cannot retouch a picture of a person without a disclaimer saying that it's been retouched, similar to images that you would, or to advertising like on tobacco products and things, to say it causes cancer. So again, it's something that you've got to think through and decide what you're comfortable with doing. But anyway, I've done this one twice in the past few months, and here's one version, and then I did it again and it came out like this. And so even I will retouch these differently each time. Looking at these side by side, I don't like this one because it looks a little too fake. I think I was doing the demo on a projector and I was going a little overboard so that people could see the effects. This one looks a little bit more natural. There's still some kind of skin texture and stuff in there. But one thing that keep in mind you can do within a certain amount is if you do retouch a little bit overboard, you can always throw a mask on that and paint out some of the heavily retouched stuff. You can always bring the opacity down a little bit to let some of the original texture show through there. So try to get as accurate and as good a results as you can with the original retouch, but as long as you've worked somewhat non-destructively, at the very least, I've left the background layer intact here, then that's going to help you if you go too far. It's really easy to work at this zoom amount for an hour, and then you get backed out and you're like, holy cow, there is no detail there anymore. So just keep that in mind. All right, the thing that I want to show you on this particular image is called frequency separation. There's tutorials, there's links, you can Google it. There's a ton of information about frequency separation. I'm not going to teach you how to do it, but I want to show you some basics of it, and maybe one way that's a little bit easier to get that done, and my workflow. So first thing I'm going to do, let me go through here and turn off some of these extra layers, is I'm going to do a quick run through of just healing, patching, cloning, big details that are going to be there. And so that would be like this. This is all local pixel editing, and all I did to get to this point is duplicate my background layer and then go to work with the clone stamp tool, the healing brush, spot healing brush, patch tool, and so forth. Okay, so I've just focused on getting rid of the bigger details that stand out. And for a lot of jobs, that's all you need. You don't need to go into anything more heavy duty than that. The next step would be to, if we were taking this further, is to apply frequency separation, which is going to break out your details into a high frequency layer. Oop, wrong one. That's our high frequency layer all by itself. And if you look at this up closely, it's just fine detail. There's no color information, there's no shading, it's just the fine detail. Our low frequency layer looks like this. It's just color and shading. It's not fine detail. Okay, and you'll learn how to do that in the lessons, in the lectures, and in the links that are posted. But that's the frequency separation step. Sometimes you can get carried away with that. And again, don't be shy about bringing the opacity down a little bit if you went too far. You don't want them to look plasticky, and that's one place where it can get out of hand really quick if you do too much frequency separation. Okay, next step would be to add some shading to this. And in this case, I did a dodge and a burn layer using curves. Okay, so here is lightening up some darker spots. And again, with light coming across someone's face, any kind of texture is going to cast a shadow. And so dodging is just filling in those shadows. Burning is darkening areas that are bright. And so just using some dodging and burning, or lightening and darkening selectively, that's going to allow for a more even image. What that looks like, there's the dodge layer. It's just little tiny brush strokes on the mask of a curve that is meant to brighten the image or darken the image. There's the burn layer. Okay, I've got an eye adjustment here. Let me see if I can turn that on. And one that is going to just remove some of the veins in the eyes. You can't see much here, but it's taken effect. It's there. A little bit of an outline on the iris just to make that stand out more. This one is probably a little heavier handed than it needs to be, but brightening up the light parts of the iris. And I ran an action to do this, and it has a color change feature, but I didn't use it. Okay, and then we've got contouring. Contouring, if you have watched those makeup videos, you know what contouring is. If not, you can Google it. But essentially, it's a process of how makeup gets applied sometimes to add shadows in certain places and highlights in certain places. Now, as opposed to my shading group down here that has, darkening in very localized areas, like this, contouring is more about broad strokes. So, brighter highlights, darker shadows. It's a little more subtle, right? And there's probably people who could do a lot better than me at this. If you've got a background in makeup at all, or you know how to apply makeup, then, or you get the concepts of it, then it'll make a lot more sense to you. I'm not a makeup guy, sorry. But just a little bit brighter in certain areas, a little bit darker in certain areas. All right, and I've got that turned down. If I turn that up, maybe you'll see a little bit more of the effect. Yeah, if it's too much, you can always bring it down, which apparently I did because I had that down around 60 something before. All right, and so that's the kind of the workflow that you would go through on this image. But again, watch the videos, see what you like and what works for you. But what I don't want to see when I'm grading these is just really, really overly plastic looking images. This version up here is maybe pushing it a little. I got too much stuff. I can't turn that back on and off right now. But anyway, don't go too far. Don't make it look unrealistic and everything. Try to make it look natural. All right, let's close that. This one right here, let's go through it. And I'm going to do this one with you. This is just a picture from the internet of someone with skin redness. I think it came from like a doctor's office, a chemical burn or a sunburn or something here. Anyway, the goal of this project, this file in the project, is to remove the redness from the skin. And so we're going to do that really simply with an adjustment layer. We're going to do a hue saturation. And we're going to do a series of hue saturations. And notice my properties panel pops up, and it's all the way across my entire screen. And I'll show you why in a minute, but I'm going to leave it right there. Yours isn't going to be that big by default, and you're going to want to make it big, because you're going to need to have some fine-tuned control over this slider at the bottom. So first off, we want to adjust the reds. We need to select the reds. There's a couple ways we can do that with the little tool here, target adjustment tool, or we can just click and say reds. And what that does is it's going to put these little boundaries on the slider at the bottom. And what that does is just specify what color ranges these adjustments are going to apply to. Now, if I drag the saturation all the way over, we can see what's being saturated is just the reds. We don't want all the yellows, we don't want magentas, we don't want anything except for the specific reds that are in the skin there to be affected by this. We could spend forever making a perfect mask, but we don't need to. We can just use the color information to adjust itself. I'm going to grab these sliders and drag them in until I start to get rid of those yellows. And notice where the slider is in the oranges and yellows. Those are obviously not tones that I want to get. There are two big handles on the outside. Magentas aren't really a factor right now. We have got the reds in the middle here. Inside those two big handles, there's two small handles. And so what we're looking at is kind of feathering between, or a transitional area between, the fully selected or adjusted colors here down to those that are not being affected on the right hand side of that slider and out. So let's drag that one in a little bit more. And if we go all the way, we won't see much of a difference here on this preview, but it'll start to make a difference in a second. Let's just keep going in until we get into just the red parts of the skin. Now, all of her skin isn't red. We want to retain as much of her normal skin tone as we can. And so probably about right there, I think. The magenta, I don't think there really is any magenta in there, or blue, so we could probably just go all the way out there and it wouldn't make any difference. But just for precision, we'll bring that one in too. And really start to target just a very narrow band of reds that we want to affect. And just kind of a back and forth process of getting this to where we think we've got those reds and nothing else. All right, maybe a little more. Yeah, let's go right there. Bring this in really tight. Okay. Nope, too much. There is magenta right in there. Okay. Anyway, let's say that's good. Now, I obviously don't want it to be that saturated. That was just to check what we're going with. So we'll put that back to 0. Then the big thing is the hue. That's the issue, is this hue of red. We don't want that. So drag the slider over one way or the other, and you'll see that it's changing the hue. And we want to reduce the redness, so we'll just go over to the right a bit, and it starts to get green. That's not what we want. So we'll back off until it's not green anymore. We can crank the saturation again just to preview what's going on, and that can be helpful to see the effect of that color shift. You know, if we start to get into greens and oranges with it really saturated, then it's going to be greens and oranges with it not very saturated as well. But it's again a back and forth process. Now keep in mind that the reds in the skin tone here are also darker than the regular skin tone that this woman has here, and so there's going to need to be some lightening too. Let's bring that lightening up a little bit. And if we did too much, it looks really splotchy and not good. So just enough to where it's as natural as can be. Maybe desaturate a little bit too. And notice that we're starting to get kind of patchy, and that means that I probably need to soften that selected edge here a bit. Bring in some more of those mid-tone or magentas on this side. We really want to get all those reds. I don't need to make it so tight on the left-hand side. And I'm just watching what's changing in here. If you put your eye, focus on this area right here around her eyebrow, and if I turn this on and off, that's her normal skin tone right about there, right? So that's my point of reference. Make sure that you find a point of reference to work with on this. As I drag this slider over one way or the other, you'll notice that we are starting to affect that skin tone over here, but right here we're kind of not. And so I think that's probably where I want to and the amount of adjustment that's going on. Just moving those sliders back and forth and seeing what their effects are. A little bit more. If we go too far, it gets really green. I'm going to stop somewhere right around there and turn this on and off. And you can see it's making a drastic difference already. But it's not done. Don't try to do this all in one step because you're going to end up going too far with that. We're going to break this up into more than one step. So let's go and just do another hue saturation layer. Starting over from scratch. This time I'll click on the little finger there, the target adjustment tool, and just click once on that red area that I want to select. And that puts us here, starting point. Let's drag the saturation over. And right off the bat, we're getting less included in this. And we would just tighten this up again. Let's make that more saturated. And I just want to get those reds that are kind of right there in the forehead, mostly. Close enough. All right, let's bring this back down to 0. And this time when we move that hue slider over, we're starting to get just those reds right there in the middle. And it takes a little bit more aggressive hue adjustment because those are a little deeper hues. But that should work. Let's bring their saturation down a little bit more. And let's lighten it up. Because again, those reds are darker colors. All right, that's a little overboard, but that's okay because I want to show you something else. We turn this on and off. And we're starting to get somewhere with this, right? So now I'm going to drag that properties panel and dock it over here. It's out of the way. All right, and we can just turn these both on and off at the same time and see how it looks. Let's go ahead and group those. And we'll call this our hue adjustments. I can put a mask on a group easily. So let's do that. And I want to mask out some areas where maybe we don't want to have any kind of hue adjustment happening at all. So I'll grab my brush tool. Let's make it probably a little softer edged, a little bigger, and turn this on and off. And let's take a look at a couple things. First off, there's redness in the skin here, right? But there's also redness in the lips. That's natural. People have, more red tones in their lips typically. Her eyes got a little bit of an adjustment, it looks like. If I watch those, they look a little different to me, but I may be wrong. So I'm just going to go in with my brush tool on black, and I'll add a mask on there. Now it looks a little bit too heavy right now. It looks like I'm applying lipstick, but it's okay. We can back it off in a second. But I'm just going to paint in, a terrible amount of lipstick here. That's okay. All right, I'm not going to be super precise, but I'll just paint out with white some of the excess there. Let's just check the eyes and see how does that look if we paint with black. Are we getting, there is some pink there in the eyes. I don't know if you can see that showing up over zoom very well, but that pink is not necessarily because of that redness in the skin. It's just that everybody's got a little bit of pink in their skins. No matter what your skin color is, we have blood underneath, and there's going to be some pinkness in it. And if you take all that out too much, people are going to look kind of dead. So we don't want to do that. So let's just paint in around here, around the eye. If you get a little bit outside the lines, that's okay. Just switch to white, and you can paint that back out. All right, now the lips there, they look a little bit too much to me, so we can just double click on that on our mask, and it's going to take us into select and mask in this case. I don't want it to be in select and mask. I want to get into the properties of the mask. So I'll just click open on the properties panel here, and it would be a good time to make that a little smaller again. Now I'm just going to drag this density of my mask over until I think it looks a little bit more natural on the lips there. I can also come in, I'll click on the mask itself and see how gray that is. Uh, and this is really not a precise mask at all, and that's okay. What I'm going to do is just grab I can go into like the dodge and burn. I can use those. I always forget where they are here, but there's not a lot of times where you want to do destructive edits like dodging and burning, but layer masks is one of those. So we can go into this layer mask tool and let's dodge. That's going to lighten it up. Maybe am I doing this wrong? I don't do dodge and burn often enough to remember which is which. Okay, forget it. I don't want to do that. I'm going to just do this differently instead. We'll go Command L and do a levels adjustment on our mask. And I'm getting sidetracked. You probably don't need to bother with this stuff for the assignment. Yeah, let's not bother with it. Anyway, we can feather it. We can adjust density. Make those lighter or darker. That's probably the simplest way to stick to, just adjusting density. But a little bit of pink and everything is going to be normal. It should look good in there. If we've gone too far at removing pinks and reds from the skin tone, then just make sure that you back it off a little bit. We can go into opacity of that whole group. And, you know, if we go too far, then we start to bring it back, you know. But maybe a little bit helps it look a little bit more natural. Just make sure that you're looking around and making sure that the lightening is taking place as well. I probably need to spend a little bit more time on this one. If you look up here in the forehead, see how it looks kind of tanned almost. And that's not because of a tan, it's because of the redness that was there is a darker color. And we changed the hue and we added some lightness and some desaturation, but it might take a little bit more lightening. So maybe some curves layer to lighten things up and then selectively paint that in, like the contouring or the shading on the previous image. Just some things to watch for there. All right, let's go ahead and close that. And the last one is this here. And I don't have enough time to record a long video of the whole process start to finish. And I don't have a start to finish example ready to show you right now, but I've got the enough to get you the idea. Now, the workflow on this particular image, anytime you want to work on an image, you want to think about what is the laziest yet most effective way that I can finish this job. In the case of this image, if we think through it before we even start doing anything with tools, that would be to get rid of as much as we can on one side of the face. And because most people's faces are the same on one side and the other, within a tolerance level of asymmetrical faces, we can just copy and paste from one side to the other. Okay, so let me show you what that looks like in this case. We'll turn on this group, turn off some of this extra stuff. Now I've got a layer here that just had a little bit of well, let me show you. This is off topic, but I'll show you now. This image is like the others, it's just pulled from the internet. And if you look in really close, there's some serious JPEG artifacts in there. We've got a lot of compression because this has been saved and resaved with a lot of compression. And so we get these blocks, these little pixel grids that are simplified areas of detail, which really kind of reduces the file size, but it also trashes the image a bit. So we don't necessarily want that all the time. And Photoshop has added a thing called neural filters, which are AI-based filters that look at an image and they're going to make adjustments based on the image to a larger extent than anything else that's been in Photoshop before. Now, I don't know that this will work pretty well or pretty fast while I'm screen sharing, but let's see. It should take a little bit longer. Can I zoom in while it's running? Yes. Okay. So you can see the JPEG compression that's in there right now and the progress bar over here on the bottom. And before too long, it'll finish. This is not a step that you have to do for the assignment, by the way. I just thought I'd point it out right now. All that compression artifact is gone. Now, the result is that it may make your image look a little softer. The details might be less crisp, but it will get rid of some of those JPEG artifacts. So when you're retouching, if there is a lot of compression, that can help, because otherwise, not only do you have to clone and match details in the image, you have to match the grain and the noise and the JPEG artifacts that were introduced from the compressed image before. And so it can be useful to run this filter. Other filters like skin smoothing, they've got a ways to come. I haven't been able to find really good results with that, except on like very specific images that Adobe provides because they work that way. But anyway, just something to be aware of if you've got those neural filters. That's what this is. I've got a work layer here, and that work layer has some start on it. It's not a complete finished job yet. But what that looks like is cloning, patching, spot healing, and healing brush. That's all this is. To go through and start to remove some of those tattoos. I've got a little bit more where I just kept going, and then I don't know why I made a new layer at that point. And then the big part of this, finishing this up, I went ahead and skipped ahead to do this, but probably be good to remove the tattoos from the whole top of the head and everything else before you get to this point. But at some point, you're going to want to just go ahead and take this half of the face over on the right, copy it, and flip it over to the other side. Because there's just too much down here to bother with, you know? You don't need to necessarily. We're not going for, photojournalism here where it has to accurately represent everything. You're showing off your skills, you're practicing the tools, and so we're going to retouch every single tattoo on this face. And there's no way to clone stamp out what's in the eye there, for example, or around the eye. There's just not enough clean, untattooed skin to replace, without it looking really, really bad. So we'll just copy and paste. Now, the way that works, just so you see, I'm going to grab the polygonal lasso tool, and I'm just going to make a selection. Let me get a little closer to the center there. Okay, it doesn't have to be precise or anything, but I just want to make sure that I get everything on one side of the face. So I'll go all the way out into the ear here, all the way up into the head. I'm just clicking over and over until I connect the dots there. All right, now with this stamp layer selected, I can hit Control J, and it's going to duplicate it. So I've got a copy of what I had selected right there. Control T will activate the transform controls, and I can right click on this, or I can go into the edit menu to do this too, but I'm just going to say flip horizontal. It's going to do that, drag it over here, and let's rotate it. As you're working, it might help to bring the opacity down on that layer so you see what's behind it. We want the eyes to match up. We want the lips to match up. So rotate that till you get the nose and the features, the ears, everything to match up as best you can with just rotating. And once you've got it rotated and scaled to fit the best you can, then we're going to actually do a little bit more complicated transform, because again, nobody is perfectly symmetrical on each side of their face. Maybe some people are, not me, and not this guy. Also, the camera isn't necessarily pointed straight at everybody's face all the time. It might be a little off. And so we're going to hold down Control over the corners here and just warp this a little bit more to try and get things to match. We can move. I'm holding down Control this whole time to just move individual parts, individual corners of that frame. The big thing I've found is that if you can get the eye to match up and the big features, the little features, they don't matter so much. So I'm going to go with that, hit OK, apply it. We can bring our opacity back up now. And now I don't have to spend, a year cloning out and healing and everything on this side of the face. I can just throw a layer mask on there, grab my brush tool, and brush out the edges of this with a black brush. Where's my brush tool? There we go. Okay, and I can keep everything from the one side of his face that is keepable, I guess. Everything that doesn't have tattoos on it, I can keep. Even some of the stuff that does, I can clean up, but I just want to go ahead and make it match as best I can. All right. Now, that's close enough for right now in the time that I have, But I would want to do a little bit more to finish this. What I would do is go ahead and make another blank layer over the top. And on this layer, then I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to grab the stamp tool, and I would stamp here over the center line of the nose. I would fix the tattoos here, and I'm not going to do that right now though. I'm going to go ahead and turn those back off and pick up where I left off with the last job. I didn't finish this one, but there's enough here that it should make sense. I've got a curves adjustment here. If I open up the properties for that, you can see the curves adjustment is just set to darken things down. And if I turn that on, you see what's happening is it's darkening down this side of the face over here. Look at the light source in the images that you're working on, and always try to think of how light's going to fall on your composited areas. We copied the right-hand side of his face, which is pretty bright, over on the left-hand side, which was in shadow. If we turn this on and off, look at the skin tones that are over here and the shadow levels that are here, and that's what you're trying to match up to. So I'm not going to go through doing that, but it just entails adding a mask and starting to paint things in. If it's not quite dark enough, maybe we could darken it a little bit more, try to bring those shadows down a little more, get a little more contrast in there, a little more depth to those shadows. And we just try to make that match, and we can paint it in selectively with the layer mask. All right, and I think I don't want to go too much further here because it's just junk at this point, but hopefully that gets the idea across. Now, obviously I did not finish this, but when you finish yours, you'll be able to have the nose cleaned up and everything. One last note, let me see if I have a finished example here that I can show you that might illustrate this concept a little bit. Where is he? All right, here's a sample version of that. I don't know if it shows enough detail. Anyway, let's do it in Photoshop. If you take a look at what's going on here, when we copied from one side of the face to the other, there are features that are identical on both sides. Like this little mark right here is the same on the right and the left. That's not natural to have these kind of marks that are the same. Wrinkles, blemishes, scars, anything like that. They're not going to be perfectly identical on both sides of the face. And so what you're going to want to do is make sure that you are coming in and selectively adding or moving or cloning or whatever needs to happen to make it so that the sides of the face don't perfectly match up with each other. And the last thing to really sell the composite, to sell the retouch, is to look at the eyes. If you look here, notice that the light source is reflected in the eye. We've got a reflection going down into the left over here in this eye. We copied that eye over here, and now that same reflection is going down into the right, which doesn't work, right? That kind of breaks the whole effect. So you would want to account for that by probably just, I would make a lasso selection around that eye and do what we did before. Duplicate it, flip it over, rotate it, get it to fit. And then you're going to have the reflection going the right direction. But you can always turn this off and look in this eye and see what that reflection looks like here and try to recreate that if you want to. But again, your results will all vary a little bit, but try the best you can to avoid making it look fake. Another thing that you want to avoid is when you're cloning, make sure that you're not cloning the same areas over and over again. Let me see if I can show you this. I'm just going to duplicate that real quick. And let's rasterize this version. All right, now when we're cloning and healing and patching and so on, if we sample from the same area over and over again, it's going to become a problem pretty quickly. I'm on the healing brush tool. If I go Alt click here and I paint this in, there's going to start to be issues. And I already made a mistake. I want to show you kind of the wrong way to do this. If we sample right here, let's do, I can't remember, aligned, I think. Let's do a brush stroke, kind of like that. And I haven't let go of my mouse. Look at the screen and see where that little plus sign is, that little crosshair. That's telling me where that I'm sampling from. Okay, just kind of make note of where that is in relation to my brush right now. And then when I let go, if I click over here, it's sampling from the same relative distance to where that tool is, right? So let me undo both of those. Now if I uncheck aligned, and if I paint, ignore really what I'm painting, just watch where that little crosshair is. Okay, in relation, it's up and to the right from where my brush is. Then if I come down over here, for example, and I paint, it's not up and to the right from where my brush is, it's very far up there to where I originally sampled. So I'm sampling the same area over again. It's just something to be aware of when you're using any kind of sample-based tool. Aligned or not aligned is going to change where that sample comes from. Now, I don't pay a lot of attention to that typically. I just wanted to show you so the concept makes sense. Where you sample from is going to be very important on this. If I alt-click right here and I do some work, then I alt-click right here again and do some more work, and then I'll click right here again and do some more work. Eventually, we're going to have 100 little places that are copies of the exact same pixels. And I inevitably see it with this patch right here for some reason. I don't know why it's a popular place to sample from, but if you see that little dark spot right there and right here, inevitably there's a few assignments turned in where I've got like 30 copies of that one spot throughout this guy's forehead. So make sure that you're varying where you sample from, and you're just picking different areas to make selections from. If you start to get to the point where you've removed a bunch of the tattoos, but you're really seeing those artifacts, those repetitive patterns start to show up, one thing you can do is just grab the patch tool. Patch tool is great for fixing some of those kind of things. So patch tool looks like this. What you do is you just make a lasso around the area you want to get. You drag that over somewhere else, and it's going to content or fill that patched area. And then that can help. It's only going to help so much, so you can, you really need to be cautious about where you're sampling from, and make sure you're trying to sample from areas that have similar tones and similar textures, similar noise and grain. Like for example, the tattoos go up into the hair over here. And if I use the healing brush tool and say, let's sample out here in the forehead and paint into the hair, it's not going to work right. It's going to be kind of a mushy, blurry look because it's not the same texture. But instead, if I sample in the hair next to that spot, it's going to look a lot more realistic in the end because we're getting the same pattern of, noise, we're getting the same texture, we're getting the same tones and everything. So just something to watch for. Anyway, there's a lot here. I'm going to let you stop watching videos and get to work, but let me know what questions you have over on Slack, and I hope to hear from you.